quite quiet though in the body, just for now. It's like you're really trying to get somewhere. One of the things I've tried to do a lot in my own process is challenge myself not to make pieces that follow convention in a particular way. And for me, what has been brilliant about working with the scientists is that actually they allow you through different filters to be able to break those conventions, because the conventions don't exist on their terms.
It's very important to remember that this is an elite dance company with an internationally renowned choreographer. There's only a limited amount that you can do to improve the creative skills of people who are already immensely creative. You can only really operate on the water margins. And I think in that perhaps slightly more limited view, the choreographic thinking tools have had quite a substantial influence in terms of how it is that they use particularly imagery in the process of generation, how it is that they break their movement habits. The key thing that we needed to know was what kind of imagery were the dancers actually using. Wayne McGregor uses a number of different tasking interventions when he is making a new piece, some of which involve graphic imagery, some of which involve words, or some of which involve numbers in space. And we set up some tasks for them to do of a different kind. And we had them fill out a questionnaire about what imagery they thought they used when they were in the studio. And then we put that aside, and then we had them make dance material, and we stopped them periodically, in this instance every 10 minutes, and asked them to fill out a questionnaire about how they had been using imagery during that previous period of making. And unsurprisingly, the way in which they are using imagery is somewhat different from the way in which they think they're using imagery.
One of the main things that I took away from that was observing where mentally my mind was, where the construction of the mental image before making the physical translation, and really clarifying that, because we were asked to observe again and again, where was your mind at when you were making that? Are you thinking in terms of images, in terms of sounds, in terms of body sensation? And just realizing that that choice would give us such a different outcome. We might sit down at the end of the day and discuss how we all approached a simple task. So how did you translate that acoustic sound that we had playing throughout the day into a visual image? And I might say, okay, I did it into a line drawing, which I described with different parts of my body. And I remember one very clear time when another colleague of mine who was in the company at the time, Paolo, he described how he'd created a 3D city that mapped out the entire spectrum of the studio with the same idea. And suddenly those things, they just open your eyes to, wow, there's so many different ways mentally that we can approach or construct images, and that gives such a different variety and richness to how we'll then approach it physically.
It was quite surprising for the dancers, because the things that they thought they were doing, thinking physically and intuitively, constituted a relatively small proportion of the things that came out as a product of the sampling exercise. Much more important were the spatial images that they were using, verbal thoughts, which I think surprised quite a lot of them.
We always try to challenge ourselves and make choices that are less comfortable, and I guess that's the way to dig deeper into our creativity and to find ways of pushing our limits of our own mind. We could choose to work in visual or acoustic or kinesthetic loops that then feeds us as a moving bodies in a very different way.
Wayne is often using graphic or semantic imagery to help provide a point of departure for his dancers to generate new material. Then the psychology of imagery obviously became a very real and important point. So if you ask somebody to imagine a staircase that they know well, most people will tend to imagine that staircase from the bottom looking up. As soon as they understand that they don't have to adopt that canonical perspective on the image, they can think, for example, of really wacky ways of looking at the staircase, from the side, from the ceiling, from halfway down, with their nose on the carpet. So there are many different ways in which you can do that. But that changing perspective, which is one of the rules, principles in the choreographic thinking tools process, then they know they are resourced to be able to break a habit, to generate a new image, to create a new stimulus for movement material generation.
You know, I know that I need the bodies to do something, yeah? So I have to elicit from the dancers interesting things that the body does. I find that if I do that by giving them more of an interesting image or dialogue that they have with their own imagination, that the richness of the thing that they make is clearly more dynamic, is more beautiful, more real.